Just enjoying this wonderful weather we're having up here in northern Indiana. It's a little bit of a snow day, so we can get out here in the shop and do some things. Welcome back to Cut Here Garage, everybody. Today we're going to be tearing down this little small block, what we call grinder. We're going to tear it completely down, bare block. See what everything's wrong with it and anything like that. Just give some of you guys an idea of what it takes if you've never tore down a motor before on your own, what it takes, some steps you can go through. I've had a lot of good people teach me things over the years that I've used. It's made it easy enough for me when I haven't had the money to have somebody else put a motor together. To do it myself, save some money, and be able to go racing. That's kind of what this video is for. Let you guys get an idea that, one, you guys, if you got a little bit of mechanical ability, pay some attention and stuff as you do things, that this is something you could do if you had to be able to go racing. You know, there's a lot of guys that's got, you know, just a smaller budget than others, and you know, everything you can save and keep guys out racing, keeping the sport alive, the better off we are as a whole. I mean, it takes everybody to go racing. Your big dollar teams to your small dollar teams. You know, everybody works hard to go racing. If you're not working hard, you're not running up front. You know, a lot of guys I've known over the years have done everything themselves, and at that point you want to try and save money where you can if you ain't got a lot. And this motor here is just a 350 board 30 over, so it's a 355. Bought it used. It's a $500 motor. We ran this motor, I drove it at South Bend when we first got the car back, got it out. You know, we decided to run this car. It was set inside the garage. I got it back, and it's set for 10 years, and we decided, what the hell, let's go race it. And so we put it together real quick, and then Nathan ran it at New Paris, Bobby ran it at Super Shoe, and then Nathan ran it again at Springport. It's nothing special, runs really good. I mean, it's really all you got to look for. I mean, it's nice having, you know, a really good high dollar motor. You know, makes you feel a little more safe that your parts are going to live when you're turning it, what RPM you're going to turn and stuff like that. But there's a lot of guys that do it with some lower dollar stuff, and you know, there's nothing wrong with that. So we're going to get in here and start tearing it apart. We're going to get this intake off to start with. You know, she's a dirty mess right now, but it's going to go to the machine shop, be all painted and cleaned anyway, just because, like I said, we bought it used. Really don't know a lot about it, how many laps have been on it, anything like that. So it's just time to give her a good going through. I really think the camshaft started to go flat. It's got a flat tappet camshaft in it right now. And that being said, that's one of the upgrades it's going to get, is get a roller put in it and stuff like that. And you know, just guys out here doing your stuff, don't be afraid to get in there, especially if you pick up a deal like this one. Got this motor from my buddy Wesley. It runs really good. It just bought it used, bought it cheap, and it has done us well. And that's why we're going to go ahead and build it on the channel, put it all back together, and all that kind of stuff, so everybody can kind of see what it takes to get your motor put together. And be able to afford to go racing, you know. I mean, most of the guys out there don't, that I know anyway, they ain't looking down on anybody. I know a lot of guys that are a little bit bigger buck team, and they're one of the first ones to help you and give you information, teach you stuff. I mean, and that's really what the racing community needs to be, to make the sport grow and make it easier for guys that may have helped older guys in the past that retired and they don't want to drive but want to get their kids into it and think they can't afford to. This is some of the ways you can. It's not anything that you really call rocket science. You just pay attention to specs. One thing you want to do for sure is, if you put it together yourself, make sure you use a good, reputable machine shop. You know, they take a lot of half and half, some very specialty knowledge out of the equation for you. If you have somebody that you know does the machine work well, specs everything right so that you can just assemble it, you know, they take the time to do some of the other stuff, which, you know, really the machine work at that point may be what costs you the most. But it'll give you that last little bit of security for yourself to take on the challenge of building your own motor. These last two bolts out and get this intake up off here. And I mean, I've done this enough that I know where my bolts are and what my bolts are. But if you're doing it for the first time, you may want to get yourself several different, heck, you can get you some solo cups or whatever. Label your cups, what the bolts are, and stuff like that. So, you know, as you're learning and teaching yourself how to do something like this, you're not chasing your tail on something like that. Definitely save you a lot of time running around trying to remember what was what in the beginning of assembling your motor when you're cleaning parts. If your intake sealed up good, it should come off like that. This is just silicone through here, so you're not hurting nothing, sticking a screwdriver in there and breaking the seal. Like I said before, she's a black packet camshaft motor. Somebody did take the time to come in here, and it took a lot of time actually, and ground and sanded all the rough edges and that around this lifter galley. Really what that helps is with oil return, gets the oil back to the oil pan faster, freer. Kind of helps keep it off the camshaft, which can rob some horsepower. If you look in here, right here, you see these threads. When they run a roller camshaft, a lot of people will take and screw a pipe in here, and that'll let the crankcase vent, but keep the oil from off of the camshaft while it's spinning to help horsepower. Some people will come in here and epoxy screens, so if there's any trash down in here, it'll catch it, keep it from going to the oil pan, running back to the motor. If you had a rocker arm go bad or anything like that, you'll kind of catch that and just help things out in the long run. You know, you can buy some cheaper stamp steel valve covers. If you do, there's nothing wrong with it. Make sure you use a spreader bar. You can buy them kits at O'Reilly's or any of them places like that. This spreads the load from here to here when you put the nut down to help it have good contact with the valve cover gasket. These are good cast aluminum valve cover. You don't have as much issue with that on these kind of valve covers. I like running these blue reusable gaskets. Makes it easier for running the valves and stuff like that. They work really well. Or you can use the thick cork with the metal in between them, and you'll get a lot better life out of your valve cover gaskets that way. Put this valve cover in here so we can take the rocker arms and the stud girdle, push rods, and all that stuff out. It's a good tray to stick those parts in, keep track of them, not losing push rods. I know some of you have done this stuff before, are saying, well, you need to keep your push rods and your lifters in order, which is true if you're going to reuse that stuff. Like I say, we're going to change over to a roller cam and some new push rods when we put it back together, so it's an issue we really don't have to mess with on this teardown. The reason why you have to do that is them parts get used to spinning. The lifter has to spin as it goes up and down on the camshaft and not wear the lobe off, wear a pattern down in the lifter where it starts losing lift and stuff like that and making the camshaft go flat. So that's the biggest reason why they do that. You can tell this is simple, regular 7/16 rocker arms. This motor has a split ratio of 1/6 and 1/5 rocker arms. Like I say, that's just to try and. One thing you can't get out of a small block Chevy is exhaust fast enough. So that's why some people do it. And the way this camshaft was, when I got the motor, ran the camshaft numbers, it just seemed like it was going to help this camshaft perform a little better. And it seemed to do really well. These particular stud girdles and most. Some of the cheaper ones have a U-bolt on just one side of these, and they got a U-bolt. And that's how they hold the poly lock. Them will work. The problem that I found with them, when you run your valve and you go to tighten up the U-bolt, if you don't do it evenly, the U-bolt as it comes down will twist the poly lock where it's one way or the other. And then you just change your valve lash without knowing it. So once you get them tight, you really should, if you're running that style, go back through and just make sure they didn't move when you tightened everything up. Don't have to get real radical doing that kind of stuff. You can tell they're the different valves, the rocker arms are on all exhaust valves. Get this other stud girdle off here and we'll Get these rocker arms off. You see that they're 7/16 studs. This being set up for a flat tappet cam doesn't have the lift of a rubber. You see it's only got 2 springs. Some people run 3, or the diameter will be a lot bigger of this outer spring to take the lift of the camshaft and make the valve snap shut nice and quick so you don't get lose horsepower through the valve staying open. Some people will run a rev kit on a roller cam. It just helps keep the lifters on the cam and the just helps with valve spring load and stuff like that. It's not a have to. Some engine builders do it just because that's what they've always done and it works for them. Most heads, you got to be very careful on a rev kit. I'll show you here in a second when we get these rockers off on why you got to be so careful. The heads on this motor, just a set of World Product Sportsman 2s. I can't find the casting number. Looks like it's a I-037 casting. I like them. They're made right here in the U.S. They perform well. Actually, help support your local businesses that way. And their stuff works good. Actually, their world castings which becomes art. Now, the problem you got to watch for when you run a rev kit, like on this particular set of heads, is there's nothing in here for the spring that would go in this rev kit. There's an aluminum plate that goes here, and then a spring that goes between that plate and the top of the lifter. What can happen, and it don't always happen, is this gap can let that plate start bending from the pressure of these springs. If you're gonna run that, I've always wound up having somebody weld in pieces in here to support the rev kit plate if you're running that. Most aluminum heads are flat through here. You don't have that issue. A lot of the newer heads, they figured that issue out and they cast them that way, which is a big plus. So get these other side off. I'm ready to jerk these heads off. Gotta thank my wife today. She's running the camera. Everybody else is kind of snowed in and staying out of this weather. Which I don't blame them. It sounds like it's... Now here's a prime example. Just found one of the problems with this engine. A broken inner spring. That's the inner spring. Snapped off, and that kind of helps the coil bind and stuff. It's well, this is actually a separator for the inner spring, but that can then bind up your inner or outer springs and just cause some havoc. This motor had no issues till the very last day we were running it up at Springport. It got to the point where we were you just quit pulling at the flag stand, and it hadn't done that all weekend. And kind of figured out, that's when we figured out that the valves kept backing off, so that maybe the camshaft's going flat. And this isn't helping that problem by no means. And then also figured out when we went to get the car out of the trailer, we were just going to fire it up and drive it in here. and it just didn't want to fire right. Come to find out, the fuel pump had quit. Just wasn't keeping fuel pressure. Which, if you don't have good fuel pressure at the end of the straightaway, it ain't gonna go nowhere. Some hot sauce. Oh. And some people will back these off, back their Allen. There's an Allen set screw inside of these. Once you set the valve lash, you snug that up, it helps keep it from moving. I just wait till I go and clean all my parts up before I mess with that, especially when I'm going to a different camshaft. If you have any questions, or comments, or whatever while I'm doing this, down there in the comments, ask me, tell me. I mean, heck, there may be something you do that you tell me about and may teach me something. I'm always willing to learn from anybody. The day you decide you can't learn nothing else is the day you don't go any further. Put all the valve train off. Now we're going to get ready to get these heads popped off. Some people do, some people don't, but I always like to untorque the heads in the same pattern I torque them. It really may not mean anything. It's just something I do. Hoping to just keep the head surface flat. But in all actuality, this particular case, these heads are going to get redone. So they're going to get surfaced and everything, so it really don't matter on this particular case. This motor has Arp Head Studs. Some people, or bolts, some people use studs. These come with this motor. Nothing really wrong with them. Really, the reason I prefer a stud is really only because once you put the stud in and you then set it down in the block with your sealer if it's a stock block. Then you put the nut on. Your torque is then going on the top threads as you're twisting, not the lower threads. And it seems to not to hurt the threads of the block as much. You know, if you're doing a 406, them blocks been around a long time, they'll rust, deteriorate just from age. And of course that stud will help with that. So I've had guys like Ralph Poiser, especially earlier in my career of racing. Chris Johnson at CJ Racing Engines. Kragers has recently done a lot of my machine work. And Head Racing Engines down in Warsaw. All of them are very good guys and have taught me a lot. Well, a lot of that, being able to do this stuff, the guys taking the time and, you know, giving me advice or telling me how they do things. You know, I'm still a work in progress. There's things I learn every time I put a motor together. You know, so there may be some things I do different than other people's ways of doing things, but it's worked good for me so far. I will give you one piece of advice. Anytime you don't know how many pulls, when I say pull, it's torque sequences on a set of rod bolts, replace them. Resize the rod. It's not a lot of money, especially if you got a little better motor that you're messing with. It can save you a lot of money in the long run. Keep that rod bolt from breaking, because they'll only stretch so many times before they just need to be replaced. And you know, $200 some set of rod bolts, and yeah, it's been a while since I've had another set of rods resized. I think it was, I want to say a couple $100, but you know, if it's all you got, and you can't afford to go buy a new set of rods, and a new set of rods, especially this day and age, even for a set of Eagles, you know, you may be up around $800-900, and to keep your stuff together, your block, and that's $300-400 in new rod bolts and resizing them. Maybe the difference of not having your stuff scattered all over the racetrack, or it's not an whole secret. Get this head off here. And what we'll do is we'll go ahead and pull the harmonic balancer off, time chain cover, and actually I think we'll just pull the harmonic off after I get this head off. You can see the pistons in the back side of the combustion chambers. Then we'll stop for a second and I'll get the pan off of it and get it flipped over. Get ready to pull the camshaft out and see what the cranking rods look like here. Just typical 202, 1.6 valves. Probably, I'm gonna guess, I think these were 64cc combustion chambers. Flat top piston motor. A little bit, we thought maybe this motor had a blowed head gasket. Doesn't really look like it on this side anywhere. Alrighty, we'll stop here. I'll get the other head off, oil pan off, and we'll have her flipped over to show you about taking the rods and pistons out of it, and we'll see what the bearings look like in this deal. See you in just a little bit. Okay, everybody, we got the pan off, the other head's off, timing chain cover, stuff like that. You can see this is a 2-bolt block. This motor has a main stud girdle on it. All it does is help hold the caps together, give it a little more strength, ties everything together. With it being a 2-bolt, some people will run them on 4 bolts. If they're running the stock caps, just to give the motor some more strength, because I've actually, on a high compression 383, split this cap right here in half on a set of stock caps. Of course, you don't have to worry about that if you're running a good splayed cap, billet cap, stuff like that. Alright, we're going to get this timing chain off, get the camshaft out. I've already bent the tabs back. Of course, cam button, so the cam doesn't walk back and forth. Good double roller. Timing chain, gear set. It's adjustable. This camshaft's put in 4 degrees advance. Get this off, all the lifters are out. Get this locking plate and this cam button off, and I'll show you a good way to get your camshaft out. There's tools you can buy that for installing the camshaft. You can do the same thing to what I'm about to show you. Not waste a bunch of money. And yeah, they're nice. It just depends on your budget. Timing chain off, cam gear. Okay, take the cam out. Just take a longer 5/16 bolt, or you can put 3. Just depends on what you want to do. And that lets you have some stability over the camshaft as you bring it out. You want to be very careful not to nick up your cam bearings, and pull it out as straight as you can. Trying to look for any abnormal wear on this. That lobe right there looks like it was starting to wear a little bit funny. You can see the wear marks on when it comes around. How it's thin through here, that's where it's spinning. And of course it gets on top, it's hard to see. You can see how the top of the lobe's shiny all the way across. Because that's at its highest point, most pressure. It's your normal flat cap solid lift camshaft. Now the fun part, tear into this bottom end. Start with, grab me a tamper pulley. You can buy sockets to put on your crankshaft that are made to fit right over and go on to turn your crank over. When you don't have any spark plugs, compression to it, the tamper pulley works just fine. Brings it up. The first two rods up top dead center, or bottom dead center for that matter. This motor has ARP rod bolts. Scat cranking rods. I forget the brand of the piston. Now there's several different ways you can do what I'm about to do. Piece of plastic, long plastic. I just use a hammer handle and tap the piston down. That releases my cap. Like I said, we didn't know anything about the laps on this motor. And so far, the bearing wear looks really well for what it's ran. Didn't have any oil pressure issues anyway. You look at the crank right here. You want to make sure you keep your caps and your pistons or your rods at the same rod and cap. One, because they're machined to size per that cap. Then also, when you look at this bearing, it's inset on one side. That's for this camphor on this crankshaft. So, if you look here, there's a number 2 stamped in it. This is cylinder number 2. And then what that does, I always mark the outside of the piston or the rod. I stamp both the cap and the rod to the outside with the cap on like it's supposed to. That will help you keep track of where your cap and your piston's going to be. If you was to get this cap put on the other rod, you're going to know it real quick, because then this bearing will chew into this crank and let's just say you'll be looking for another motor. That's probably the biggest thing you got to keep track of, is your bearings, uppers and lowers, and that your caps are going on correctly to the front, all that kind of stuff when it comes back from the machine shop. Then to take the rod and piston out, just going to tap that rubber handle. Got it right on down till it's close. Lock this out of my hand. It is a little easier if the main girdle isn't in the way. This gives you more room to come in with what you're using. Say it's a scat. It's still an I-beam rod. It's kind of a clamor rod. Works real well. I mean, still floater piston. They still don't say what brand they are. I'll have to do some research. This flat top piston, all the rings aren't stuck, so that's a good sign. We're probably running a little richer than what we needed to. And usually, if you can know some people work at a grocery store, or after you do this a little bit and you've put some pistons in, some motors or something, you wind up with a piston box, and that makes it nice to set your pistons in, rods up, so they ain't falling over, getting banged up and stuff like that. We're probably going to bore this motor 10 over from where it is and put a dome piston on it to get some compression. So, I mean, I'm going to protect these pistons, measure them up, make sure the skirts aren't hurt, and if they're still in good shape, then I'll either give them to somebody, pass them on to somebody that can use them, that's got a block that's 30 over. They ain't doing me no good. You can have them hung from a good machine shop and your balance checked. Or I really wouldn't care if it wasn't for the fact of trying to pass them along, because I'm putting new pistons in it. So, hanging off the bench. Get the last of these out here. Grab that rock bolt, dude. No, I'm gonna find it in a minute, but
It's way down there.
hell, I'm not used to doing this with a camera on me, but hard learning what we're doing here, trying to get better at it. To be honest with you, I'm not even sure yet if this is a cast crank or steel crank. For what this motor is, it's not that big a deal. You know, it's not. You want to make sure you've got your hand or something down there to catch your piston. Yeah, that setup is looking really good. Since I already have these marked, I'm just going to pull the pistons and I'll put it all back together and up where I want it to be later after we're done making this video, so not to make it get too off boring. When this motor goes back together, I'm going to resize the rods. and new rod bolts. Like I say, I just don't know how many times they've been torqued. You don't have to change the main studs or main bolts as often, in my opinion, mainly because they're not they're not getting thrown around, that piston coming up top dead center and it having to hold that rod to the crank like these rod bolts. And they don't have to, they're a 7/16 bolts over a 3/8 bolt. So, you know, that plays into effect for why that is. Well, all the bearings look great. And no matter what you do, you leave this motor drain, and when you roll it over to tear it down, you're going to find oil in places you didn't want to find it. This is the nature of it. I'll go back through and put all this stuff back together just because it's already marked like it's supposed to be. Nice set of rods and pistons. We'll be able to see how the main bearings look. And get a look at exactly what this crankshaft is. bearings so far look really good. Now we'll get ready to pop this girdle off and see what the crate looks like. Main bearings. You're going to want to make sure you keep track of these washers. They keep for a smooth torque and more of a distribution. Main bearings look just as good so far. A little bit of wear, but nothing that was signs of it letting go. And if you look at these caps, there's a 1 stamped, and the arrow is to the front of the block. And that should be the same on at least all small block Chevys. When your crank is sitting in here, it should turn nice and free like that. Thrust bearing looks good. For not knowing how many laps are on it. Now I'm gonna guess that this is a cast crank by this line right here. Most times that casting mark, if it's steel, will be wide, about that much wider, especially like on a stock GM crank that's steel versus cast. But I mean, that's all right for what this motor was bought for. What we're doing with it, I mean, that's kind of the purpose of it, to show you can build a lower dollar motor, go be pretty competitive if you do your homework on your car and all that kind of stuff, and get started in racing and have some fun and not spend a bunch of money while you're trying to figure out if you like racing or while you're learning. You know, you can run a motor like this for a couple years, get good at doing what you're doing, and then upgrade yourself to a better power plant that you can put more power in, more RPM and stuff like that, and just keep moving up. We ran very well with this motor at 4 different racetracks against some great cars. I mean, you go to any of those 4 racetracks, we went to South Bend, New Paris, the Super Shoe, guys that go up there, Springport. You know, this area's got some of the baddest, fastest street stocks in the country, as far as I'm concerned, that you race with. And they all started someplace like this, most of them, and learned and got better, and you can too. So this is where we're going to wrap this video up. Please remember to like, subscribe, comment. You know, I'm very new at this, so if there's anything I could do better, let me know. If there's better things you've done doing something like this that can help somebody, you know, comment on it. You may teach me something too. So, you know, like I say, everybody can learn. But glad you can be with us. And this is the heart of grinders. So have a good one. Thank you.